call it a dying head, and the honorable member for St. Michael West knows that, and this country, this government has a mandate to revive the manufacturing sector through the Ministry of International Business.
Thank you, Minister. I was only asking for your assessment with reference to your own ministry and not that of the Honourable Member of St. Michael North. You do acknowledge that your ministry does have some input. And that's what I was asking about, not his aspect of the ministry. I did note, Madam Chair, that the minister said quite categorically, and I give you the opportunity to take that back, that gone are the days of incentives. Now, my next question had to do with incentives, and it has to do with incentives to help promote, develop the green energy sector for smaller players potentially in the Barbadian economy. My question, what incentives for facilitating small enterprise initiatives relative to green energy, seeing that the government has a policy of moving towards that status by 20, is it 30 or 33? But I heard the minister said gone are days of incentives, so maybe that nullifies the question.
The member for St. Michael West, I know he listens and he picks out what he wants to hear. And indeed, we recognize that the renewable energy sector, and he knows very well that we are looking to go to a fossil-free environment by 2030. And yesterday, and I will ask the Director of Utility Regulations to come and take the seat where the General Manager of Finance is. We have, within the last year, recognized that the renewable energy sector is vital not only to create a fossil-free environment, but to give the consumers the best prices in terms of electricity generation, and also for our investors in this country to have their fair share of the renewable energy sector as it relates to both social and economic development. And we came up through the Fair Trading Commission, because it falls under their purview, to come up with a rate for renewable energy for independent power producers who fall in the category of producing renewable energy or utilizing the renewable energy technology to produce electricity of 1 or less than 1 megawatt. And indeed, we use that methodology called feed-in tariff. And we did a comprehensive study. We hired a consultant. And having done that, we are now in a position, and we will announce to the public the rates for independent power producers, investors, who will sell all their electricity to Light and Power, who then will send back to the consumers. And we came up with a good rate, having gone through the necessary methodologies and the studies. For a consultant, we use the feed-in tariff methodology to arrive at rates for biogas, wind, and all the other renewable energy technologies. And I will allow the Director for Utility Regulations to speak to you on what has been done thus far in terms of empowering investors, local investors, to get involved in the renewable energy drive as we seek to build up that sector as a key sector for this country as we move forward with our trust towards the 2030 goal of being a fossil-free environment. So I will allow Dr. Aikeshi from the Fair Trading Commission to speak to you on that particular question.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, as well as the other parliamentarians. My name is Marsha Aikeshi, Director of Utility Regulation with the Fair Trading Commission. I would want to start by giving a history in terms of renewable energy in Barbados and where the Commission has taken it thus far. In 2009, 2010, the Barbados Light and Power would have approached the FTC with a proposal for allowing self-generators, distributed generators, those are persons with primarily solar PV systems on the rooftops, to sell back to the grid any excess. With that, we developed a pilot program that started in 2010. It was either run for 2 or 3 years. Then we transitioned that into a permanent program with a rate that was linked to the cost of fossil fuel in the international market. That was changed from, I think, 1.8 times to 1.6 times at some point. And then in 2016, we also determined that it was time, the sector was ripe enough, the technology was ripe enough for us to move away from the link with fossil fuel and have renewable energy valued on its own merit. So we moved from a voided cost type of system for valuing renewable energy, one based on the renewable resource cost. That was done at a time when there was recognition that the sector was facing some significant challenges because it was facing reducing oil cost. So they were no longer being deemed competitive. We recognized that this was a fledgling industry that we wanted to shore up. And we took that position to change out to resource-based cost. That was done at the time in 2016. Solar PV then would have been 41.6 cents, while wind, which is hardly utilized, was what? Around that vicinity, but I think it was slightly higher or slightly lower. So that was one of our first steps in terms of ensuring the viability of renewable energy suppliers in Barbados. Those persons that are going and installing systems on houses, for example. At that time, there were about 20 solar installer businesses in Barbados. That dwindled to some extent, and I believe that now we are seeing a surge in that regard again. October 2019, we took the step of going towards feed-in tariffs. Prior to that, it was referred to as a renewable energy rider. And we expanded the scope to systems up to 1 megawatt. Prior to that, it was up to 500 megawatts. So persons wanted to get in at a larger space, in a larger capacity, had now the opportunity to do so. Beyond that, in terms of allowing a larger number of players in the sector, we have taken the decision in October 2019 to create a particular space for community shared projects. And under community shared projects, the two criteria that we have for eligibility: one, there must be a minimum of 15 participants, as well as no individual entity could own more than 50% of that share. What that does is to allow the average Barbadian to become a critical mover and shaker in that space. They can now own a segment of the renewable energy pie in Barbados. So it allows for persons to retain those earnings, which is a critical thing that renewable energy provides for an entity. Because you're using local resources, and as such, you can retain any profits, as opposed to a system where you have fossil fuel being generated. Those funds are being sent offshore to buy that oil. It also allows for a segment of the population to retain, as opposed to it being a situation where it is foreign investor-led. So those are some of the strategies that have been employed thus far to allow small businesses and individuals to be able to have a stake in our renewable energy market.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry that I have to go back to this subject because I know that this ministry is a lot more than dispensing trust loans. But the inner man tells me that this is something that I really have to say because this is very, very, very important to me. I represent the constituency of the city of Bridgetown, a constituency that I spent my formative years living. A constituency that as a boy, it was far easier for persons living in communities within this constituency to be denied a job based on the address that they had on the application than it was for a hawker or the snow cone or snowball man to be able to borrow $500 from a bank. So that for me, the advent of the trust loans is one of the most significant and progressive steps in any direction that I've seen since I became a member of Parliament. Although $5,000 in the scheme of things may not be a lot of money, $5,000 is a significant sum if you have a small rum shop or grocery shop that you are having things on consignment in order to be able to make a living for your family, or for a vendor who has to sell the few snacks that they're selling in order to be able to purchase snacks to sell the following day. Or if you're a seamstress or a tailor, and finally you have the opportunity to purchase a machine that will not only accelerate the rate of production, but also allow you to produce more so that you can earn more. In other words, a large number of persons who would have been denied the opportunity to have their dreams realized. So this trust loan has done a considerable amount of good for people coming from the constituency that I represent. And although I cannot sit here and say with any degree of certainty that everyone that had a trust loan did exactly as they said they would do, because I don't know, but I know of sufficient or enough persons who have done well and who have been able to either start a business or continue a business in a way that they would not have been able to do without having the opportunity to borrow $5,000. And so I say thank you very, very much to the minister and his team who have been entrusted with the responsibility of administering this trust loan. But my question is, given the way things have been going so far, have you had many or any applications from persons who would have been able to graduate from a $5,000 loan to a $10,000 loan? And secondly, and related, and then this is the end of me, have you started to construct that bridge or that nexus that would see people transitioning from a trust loan to a fund access loan, for example, which obviously would give an indication that things are growing and perhaps they're employing some of the people from the same areas that they live in and are working in. Do you have any plans for doing that? Because for me, I would jump for joy if I could see people graduating from the infancy of the trust loan to the adulthood of a fund access loan.
Madam Chair, I don't think you're allowed to jump in this chamber. And I certainly won't want to see the member jump at this stage, but you can jump when you're on the outside. I would allow the member, the general manager for Fund Access, to take this question.
Good evening again. Just to respond to the first question as it relates to the graduation to the $10,000. Currently, we have some applications under consideration. However, we are taking the fact that we have some 1,100 applicants that are still outstanding to receive the $5,000 for their first loan. So we are being very careful to make sure we try to honor those that actually need the $5,000 before we move on to $10,000. However, we have a draft memorandum of understanding with Fund Access for a graduation program. What we are seeking to do, however, is to have the Fund Access business development officers work closely with our business development officers so that when we are making that transition to Fund Access, is a smooth transition. So if we identify an applicant who wants 10,000 or more, we would actually engage Fund Access from very early with that client so that our business development officer and Fund Access business development officer can actually interact with that client and help them to move from one stage to the other. Notwithstanding the fact that they must meet some criteria. They must have attended our training and they must have followed certain guidelines and did the things that we have in place to ensure that they are ready to move to the next stage. Outside of Fund Access, we also look to engage the credit union movement, have preliminary discussions. However, we still are trying to pin that down to some memorandum of understanding. I don't want to actually speak on the banks right now, but because the first attempt was not successful at all in trying to get that done. So we are going to work with Fund Access to try to achieve the graduation process.
Thank you very much, and congratulations to the team.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I too want to echo the sentiments of the representative for the city in congratulating the Minister and his team for what I consider to be transformational at this juncture of our development. But I also want to go back to something that the State Amos would have mentioned. He said that at some point in time you were engaging with members of the cultural industries and then it sort of petered off. If I can just say this, and I'm just making a comment, for many years in Barbados and across the Caribbean, I could say, the members of the creative and the cultural industries have struggled to find capital to do projects and to do very many things. The traditional lending agencies would always see them as high risk, and we know how risk avert people are, and that was a major problem. But you need, at this juncture, from all the things that I've heard, you probably need now to reach out to that particular sector in a complete different way in terms of being able to let them know what is available. One of the things that you're going to have to face is the requirements of guarantors and stuff like that. If you live in a society where people believe that the cultural and the creative industries can only make money in other territories and not in Barbados or the Caribbean at large, there are some things that you're going to have to do differently. Otherwise, they would never be able to get guarantors for these loans and whatever. And we have to begin to think in terms of what risk are we prepared to make in order to get that particular sector moving. For instance, if someone didn't take risks in terms of Hollywood, in terms of Silicon Valley and these other things, they would never come into existence. And even though we still believe that our societies or our numbers are small, we are really operating in a global space. And the Minister made the point earlier when you talk about wanting to export and that sort of stuff. Manufacturing for many years has never been able to export in the numbers that might be required. But I would like to humbly suggest to you that the cultural industries as they stand do not need things like raw material for high prices and these sort of things in order to be exportable. And that the time has come where that particular sector, which I am proud to be responsible for in a way, has the capacity to transform the Barbadian economy and by extension the Caribbean. And I just want to know going forward, what are some of the things that you're looking at? Because I know you've started some really good work, but I want to know a little bit more about some of the things for the benefit of those who may be listening that you're working on to actually empower that particular sector.
Madam Chair, thank you, member for St. Philip West. And indeed, we have had several conversations, and we understand the challenges with your industry, like you rightfully mentioned. And yesterday, I mentioned some of the incentive schemes, and there's one that I will speak of, Madam Chair, the Enhanced Credit Guarantee Fund. This is a fund run through the central bank, and this provides guarantees or guarantor for persons who access loans of up to 80%. I think that fund is capitalized through the IDB with some $80 million, if I stand to be corrected. But that is how it is capitalized, through IDB. And currently, we have eligible businesses who can access that funding as a guarantee within the agricultural and the commercial and the industrial and services sectors. I will want to posit and I will want to suggest that the cultural industries be included in that category of eligible businesses, since that issue of access to capital is indeed a fundamental issue within our society. Whether peer-to-peer lending will be relevant, that is questionable within your sector. But I would want to say to you that I will make a case here in this Lord Chamber that the Enhanced Credit Guarantee Fund, the eligible businesses be extended to include the cultural industries. And that is all I would say on that, because you rightfully recognize that there's a dearth of funding, not only for your sector, but within some micro and small and even medium enterprises in this country. And it is based on what I call asymmetric information. The risk is greater with the lending agencies, and we have those schemes, the Enhanced Credit Guarantee Scheme, that I think will benefit you, and also the Enterprise Growth Fund Limited. So those are the two avenues, and I would more want to recommend the Enhanced Credit Guarantee Scheme for your guys to access, or all ladies, guys using the to access funding to shore up your creative and cultural industry experts.
Thank you very much, Minister, and that would lead me to suggest that the time has come where the two ministries would need to sit down and really put together a plan to make this information available to that sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And like all the other members, I want to say congratulations to the Honorable Minister for the work he's been doing so far in what could only be described as transformative work in Barbados. But my question, Minister, speaks to standards, and I know you hinted at it and that you said you would speak to it at some later part of the presentation. You know, I know that your mandate, or the mandate of the BNSI, is the preparation, promotion, and implementation of standards in all sectors. And I think it is very important that we do have a conversation about standards, especially at this stage in our development as a country. And I suspect standards would help us to be, well, first of all, protect Barbados, but it could also lead to our own innovation, our own competitiveness, and so on. You know, people have a tendency to suggest that Barbados has no standards, and that developed countries oftentimes dump anything that they want into Barbadian society because of the lack of standards. And I have a view that that may not necessarily be true. And so I have two questions, and I would tie them together, but I would love to know, first of all, what are the standards, really? And what are the powers of enforcement in relation to these standards? Because it's okay to have standards, but if you do not have the power to enforce, certain penalties and so on in relation to standards, then we expose ourselves nonetheless. And then more specifically for me, because I know we've worked together in trying to devise some standards for the ban on plastics, exactly where we are with that so that we could give the public an update. But overall, just a general idea as to the standards, how those standards are set, who evaluates them, and how they're monitored. Thank you.
Madam Chair, and through you, member for St. Michael's South, a very pertinent question, and I did mention earlier today when the question was posed by the member for St. Michael West. I think the member for St. Michael West posed the question stand to be corrected with respect to manufacturing and what we are doing. Madam Chair, I can get into the specifics of plastics, the ban on petroleum-based single-use plastics. Presently, we have requested through ASTM, the American Standard for Testing and Materials, ASTM International, some 5 or 6 standards as it relates to single-use plastics and the new alternative products